The show begins with a brave group of Vikings sailing toward an unfamiliar shore. As soon as they land on the shore, they are met with venomous snakes and swarming insects, signaling that the land is dangerous. With their rations running low, they decide to venture into the dense forest, hoping to find some resources. But as they move deeper, a bunch of arrows strikes one of their mates that kills him instantly. Finding no resources and facing constant danger, the Vikings decide to return to their homeland. When they approach the shore, they find no wind to carry their boats away from the land. Desperate, they call on their god, All-Father, for help. They first try to please him by poking out their eyes, but the wind does not change. In their next attempt, they set one of their own on fire, but still, the god's power remains silent. With no other choice, they turn to what they believe will catch their war god's attention: fighting. They begin a brutal battle among themselves. As the fight intensifies, the All-Father seems to be pleased, and just as the chaos reaches its peak, a strong wind picks up, filling their sails and allowing the surviving Vikings to escape the cursed land. The scene shifts to a prison, where a prisoner named Shadow Moon is lifting weights. He tells his cellmate that he has a bad feeling about something, but his words are quickly dismissed. Later, he speaks with his wife, Laura, and shares his unease with her. She tries to calm him, reminding him that he has just 5 days left before his release, and that they are planning a surprise welcome party. That night, as he is about to sleep, he sees Laura's image on the walls of his cell. They share words of love before he falls asleep, only to dream of something bizarre. In his dream, he wanders through a forest filled with human bones, where trees' branches stretch out toward him and wounds him. The next morning, the warden calls Shadow into his office with bad news. Laura has died in a car accident earlier that day. He is also told that he will be released that afternoon, earlier than planned, due to her death. After his release, Shadow heads to the airport to fly to Laura's funeral, but struggles to change his flight to an earlier time. He remembers a lesson his cellmate taught him to never mess with airport staff, or he could end up back in prison. Keeping this in mind, he stays quiet and books the next available flight. It is for the following morning, so he waits in the airport lobby all night. In the morning, at check-in, Shadow notices an old man who quickly gains the sympathy of an airline employee. Despite not having a ticket, the man somehow ends up in first class. Shadow's seat is double booked, so he is placed next to the old man, who makes no effort to hide his trick. As they strike up a conversation, the old man introduces himself as Mr. Wednesday, who knows an unexpected amount about Shadow. As they talk, Mr. Wednesday offers Shadow a job, but Shadow declines, mentioning that he already has a position lined up at a friend's gym. The old man mutters that Shadow might not have a job after all, and tells him to think it over. Afterward, Mr. Wednesday falls asleep, and not long after, Shadow does too. He has another strange dream, this time encountering a flaming buffalo in an orchard covered with skulls. He is suddenly awakened when the plane lands early due to weather issues. Determined not to miss his wife's funeral, he rents a car and drives home. Meanwhile, at a bar, a man meets a woman named Bilks, whom he is connected with through a dating site. Though it is their first meeting, she quickly leads him to the bedroom, where she begins to seduce him. As they become intimate, she asks him to whisper her name and worship her as a god. When he does, the man is suddenly consumed by her. After a long drive, Shadow stops at a bar where he runs into Mr. Wednesday again. Wednesday starts revealing unsettling truths, and continues offering Shadow a job. But Shadow gets frustrated and reminds him that he plans to work for his friend Robbie. That is when Wednesday delivers shocking news. Robbie was killed in the same car crash as Laura. At the table, as Shadow tries to avoid accepting Wednesday's offer, Wednesday pressures him to make a decision. Shadow decides to use a coin trick he learned in prison to settle it. He picks heads, unknowingly sealing his fate to join Wednesday's team. With the bet won, Wednesday steps away, confident in his victory. Soon after, a man named Mad Sweeney introduces himself as a leprechaun and shows Shadow a coin trick that he has not mastered yet. When Wednesday returns, he insists that since Shadow lost the toss, he must work for him. Shadow agrees reluctantly, but only if he can attend his wife's funeral first. He makes it clear that he neither likes nor trusts Wednesday. However, they seal the deal with 3 cups of meat. After that, Sweeney challenges him to a fight, offering one of his special gold coins as a prize if Shadow wins. Shadow hesitates but, provoked by Sweeney, agrees to the brawl. He defeats Sweeney and takes one of the gold coins. The next morning, Wednesday lets Shadow drive to Laura's funeral, where Audrey, Robbie's wife and Laura's best friend, reveals that Laura and Robbie were having an affair. In the graveyard, Audrey tries to seduce Shadow out of revenge, but he refuses and comforts her instead. Before leaving, he tosses the coin Sweeney gave him after winning the fight. The soil quickly swallows the coin, burying it in Laura's grave. On his way back, Shadow touches a strange machine, which latches onto his face, knocking him unconscious. When he wakes, a pixelated figure turns into a man named Technical Boy. who demands information about Wednesday's plan. With nothing to offer, Shadow is punished and finds himself hanging from a noose, close to death, but is saved at the last moment. In the dim hold of a slave ship, a vibrant spider crawls over as Anansi, the trickster god, whom a slave desperately pleads for their rescue. Suddenly, Mr. Nancy appears as Anansi, warning the enslaved people about the long years of oppression, injustice, and suffering that await black people in America, revealing a future scarred by racism and hardship. He finishes with a powerful reminder that sometimes anger is needed to make a change. Urging them to fight back, he tells them to kill the Dutch slavers and set the ship ablaze. When one hesitates, fearing death, Mr. Nancy retorts that they should at least die for something meaningful. Inspired, the slaves take control, set the ship on fire, and as it sinks, Anansi slips into the water, surviving while the flames consume the vessel. After being released, Shadow seeks medical care, and once treated, he goes to confront Mr. Wednesday, angry and demanding answers. Shadow relays Technical Boy's warning, pressing Wednesday for some insight into what he is really working for. Wednesday dismisses it as a risk of the job, doubles Shadow's pay, and assures him there is a plan in place. Later, in his hotel room, Shadow dreams of his late wife, Laura, visiting him, jolting him awake and stirring deep emotions. The next day, he heads to his house to gather belongings. The next day, he goes to his house to collect his things. Every corner brings back memories of Laura, but he pushes through and keeps packing. On the bed, he finds a box from the coroner's office containing Laura's personal items. Among them, he finds her phone, along with shocking messages from his friend Robbie. Realizing the truth, Shadow decides to leave town. As he takes one last look at the house, Wednesday appears and tells him not to dwell on it since Laura was unfaithful. They then set off on a road trip to Chicago. On the way, Wednesday tells Shadow he will be meeting some important people, and hands him a list, instructing him to buy a few items. Shadow goes to buy the items Wednesday requested, but something strange happens in the store. The character from a television program named I Love Lucy, playing on a display TV, starts talking directly to him. When Shadow tries to turn it off, she is automatically turned on and explains that she is worshipped through screens, as people give up their time to TVs, phones, and other devices. She praises him for handling Technical Boy well, and tries to convince him to join her, claiming that Wednesday and his crew cannot compete with her. Shadow refuses and quickly leaves the store. Later, he meets Wednesday at a diner and tells him he feels like he is losing his mind after talking to the girl on the TV. Wednesday says it is actually a good sign. They're paying attention to him, which is better than being ignored. Although Shadow would rather be left alone, Wednesday insists that it is better to be noticed than forgotten, and explains that strange events are a type of learning, like a new language. He adds that either the world is crazy or Shadow is, and when Shadow asks if he is being messed with, Wednesday hints that a little madness might be the least of his worries. After the conversation, they then continue their journey. On the road, Wednesday throws away the cell phones Shadow bought, saying they do not need them. The scene briefly shifts to Bilquis, who continues to demand sacrifices from her lovers, both men and women. Meanwhile, the men arrive at an apartment in Chicago, home to three sisters named Zoria. Shadow and Wednesday meet only two of the sisters, as the elder explains that the third is asleep and needs her rest. Wednesday flirts with one of the sisters, offering a gift for each of them. The eldest sister, Veternia, gives Shadow coffee and offers to read his fortune. An older man named Chernobog enters, and, though clearly unhappy to see Wednesday, agrees to let them stay briefly. The man introduces himself as the brother of the three sisters, and mentions that he works at a slaughterhouse. While Chernobog and Wednesday talk in another room, Veternier reads Shadow's fortune from his coffee residue. She predicts a long, happy life with many children for him, and assures him he will not die from cancer, though his mother did. Shadow finds Chernobog and Mr. Wednesday arguing in the room, with Chernobog insisting he will not go with Wednesday. Hearing this, Wednesday prepares to leave, but Chernobog stops him, saying he cannot let him go without having supper first. Later, Wednesday, Shadow, Chernobog, and the two sisters sit down for dinner, where Chernobog talks about the gruesome details of his job, causing embarrassment for his sisters. After the meal, Chernobog challenges Shadow to a game of checkers. Shadow agrees, and as they play, Chernobog raises the stakes. He insists that if he loses, he will join Shadow and Wednesday on their quest, but if Shadow loses, Chernobog will kill him with his axe at the time of sunshine. Chernobog then reveals his hammer, and Shadow notices the blood dripping from it as Chernobog explains how many people he has killed with that weapon. Despite Wednesday's warning that he does not have to accept the challenge, Shadow agrees, believing he can win the game and convince Chernobog to join their quest. They begin playing, but unfortunately, Shadow loses, and Chernobog eagerly looks forward to using the hammer to kill him. Next, an elderly woman, Mrs. Faddle is preparing food in her kitchen for a family guest when she hears a knock at the door. She opens it to find Jackal, the Egyptian god of the dead, whom she mistakes for a robber. Jackal then shows her own lifeless body lying on the floor, and assures her that her family will take good care of her and mourn her loss. Together, they ascend a staircase, rising up into the sky, until they reach the sands of Egypt. There, Jackal weighs her heart against a feather, and she passes the test, granting her access to the afterlife. He guides her to a place with 4 doors, each leading to a different version of the Egyptian afterlife. Nervous about making the wrong choice, Mrs. Faddle asks Jackal to choose for her. He selects a door, and as she steps through, she vanishes, heading toward her eternal reward. Shadow is asleep in the Zoria sisters' apartment when he wakes to see a mysterious woman in a nightgown climbing out the window. He follows her to the rooftop, where she introduces herself as the 3rd sister, Zoria Polynochnaea. She explains that the 3 sisters each watch the sky at different times to keep a demon from escaping and ending the world. Polynochnaea then reads Shadow's fortune without his consent, instantly realizing he has bet his life and lost it to Chernabog. Noting that he often gives away his own protection, she asks him to kiss her. But as Shadow is hesitant, she kisses him herself, then pulls the moon from the sky in the form of a coin, telling him to keep it safe. Shadow suddenly wakes and heads to Chernabog, challenging him to a second game of checkers with the moon coin in hand. The terms of the game are simple. If Shadow wins, Chernabog will join him and Wednesday on their trip to Wisconsin. If Chernabog wins, he will get 2 swings at Shadow's head. Chernabog agrees, and they sit down to play again. Meanwhile, Wednesday approaches Veternia, asking her to read his fortune. She studies his coffee grounds and warns him that his plans will fail, though he assures her that is just the day's fortune. When he invites her for a walk, she predicts it will rain, but he persuades her to go with him. During the walk, he kisses her, and thunder rumbles as rain begins to fall. She remarks that she can taste him in the rain, then asks what else she might taste. Wednesday's response: war. Here, this time, Shadow wins the game, so Chernabog agrees to join him and Wednesday on their journey. However, he reminds Shadow that, since he won the first game, he still gets 1 swing at Shadow's head. The scene shifts to Sweeney, passed out in a bar. He wakes to a shotgun pointed at him and is promptly kicked out. Stumbling along the roadside, he accepts a reluctant ride from a stranger. As they drive, they follow a truck carrying metal pipes. Sweeney leans back to rest, but suddenly, a metal pipe flies off the truck and fatally impales the driver. When the police arrive, an officer tells Sweeney it is a case of bad luck. Sweeney, now furious, realizes he is missing his lucky coin, the one he had given to Shadow. In an American city, a man named Salim, a recent immigrant, is struggling to make ends meet as a salesman and to adapt to the new culture. After another unsuccessful day, he summons a cab and starts chatting with the driver, who is also of Middle Eastern descent. During their conversation, the driver dozes off at a red light, and Salim tries to wake him. As the driver stirs, his sunglasses slip, revealing flames in his eyes. Salim realizes he is sitting next to a jinn, a mythical creature he had only heard about in childhood stories. The jinn explains that he is unlike the ones in the stories. He does not have the power to grant wishes, which is why he works as a cab driver. The two continue to talk, and Salim, moved by the driver's struggles, places a supportive hand on his shoulder as they arrive at his hotel. Salim gives the jinn his room number, and they go upstairs together. In the hotel room, they share an intimate night, during which the jinn fills Salim with his flame. The next morning, Salim wakes up to find the jinn gone, leaving behind his clothes, ID, and driver's license. Salim puts on the jinn's belongings, goes outside, and sees the cab the jinn was driving. Taking this as a sign, Salim steps into the jinn's role and begins his new life as a cab driver. Shadow and Wednesday arrive at the bank with plans to rob it. Shadow feels uneasy about this, especially since he has just been released from jail and does not want to go back. Despite his concerns, Wednesday buys Shadow a hot chocolate and tells him to think about snow. He then takes Shadow to a printing office, where he handles his part of the task while Shadow focuses on the snow. To Shadow's surprise, it starts snowing just as Wednesday finishes his work. Later, while having lunch at a restaurant, Sweeney tracks them down and confronts Shadow. He demands the golden coin Shadow took from him. Shadow explains that he no longer has the coin because he tossed it on Laura's grave in his hometown. Wednesday devises a plan to withdraw all the bank's deposits by creating a false issue with the ATM. He instructs Shadow to pretend he is an officer who is overseeing the situation. As part of the plan, the officer calls Shadow to verify the details, which allows them to successfully take all the money. Once the task is complete, they head back to the motel, having carried out their scheme without raising suspicion. Meanwhile, Sweeney heads to Shadow's hometown to retrieve his lucky coin. When he digs up Laura's grave, He finds it empty, not even Laura's body remains. At the motel, Shadow finds Laura waiting for him in his room. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave 1,000 likes or 100 comments if you'd like us to continue part 2. Thank you.